Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got some updates about the Steam Deck. The videos that I posted about the Steam Deck so far did really well, so I think you all are just as excited about the Steam Deck as I am. If you missed those videos, there's a link in the description down below. One of them is all of the reasons that I'm excited for the Steam Deck, and the other is all of the things that I have concerns about for the Steam Deck. Some of those concerns are starting to melt away as we get more information from Valve, which we're going to talk about in this video. Before we get started, the Steam Deck is a handheld PC with a 720p screen from Valve, the company behind Steam, and it's got some really beefy components in it as well. Let's talk about the updates. Let's start by talking about the RAM in the Steam Deck. Before I get to that, I just want to say I am not a hardware head. I don't know this stuff super well, so I'm basically going to be simplifying it to my level. And if you know more, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. All right, Valve put out a statement basically saying, hey, we screwed up on our specs, which of course, when I saw that, I was like, oh no, it's not as powerful as they said it was, but that's actually not the case. It's actually better this way. So originally Valve had said that they had 16 gigabytes of dual channel LPDDR5. That's the RAM that's in this. And what you have to know is that the Steam Deck is very different than a traditional desktop computer. A traditional desktop computer will have a CPU and some RAM for the CPU, and it will have a GPU and some RAM for the GPU. And the RAM isn't really shared between the two. So the GPU gets to use all of that RAM for itself, and the CPU gets to use all of its RAM for itself. Well, because they went with an APU, which is a combination CPU and GPU, I'm sorry for the letter salad that I'm throwing at you right now. What that means is that that RAM is shared between the two. Now, a lot of people were very happy, myself included, that they went with 16 gigs of RAM, but the people who know a lot more than me, they were like, oh, but it's only dual channel. Is it going to have enough bandwidth in order to communicate with the CPU and the GPU at the same time? And it turns out, yes, it will. And here's why. It's not dual channel LPDDR5. It's quad channel LPDDR5, which means it's going to have plenty of bandwidth and it's not going to bottleneck at the RAM, which I think is even more music to our ears. In my video about the concerns that I have for the Steam Deck, one of the things that I was talking about is the idea of running the games off of the SD card. Would that be okay? And I suspected that it was going to be okay, but it's really good news that Lawrence Yang, basically he's one of the product heads over at Valve, he tweeted this out. He was asked a question by KMed. They said, in your interview with IGN, you stated that the Steam Deck was upgradable with an SD card. Are there concerns about the read-write speed of the SD card and slot? Will games on an SD card be playable, just taking longer to load than if stored internally? Lawrence Yang replied, yep, games will load faster off internal storage, but games still play great off of an SD card. When IGN came by, all of the games they tried and shot footage of were played off a micro SD card. I love that they took that into consideration and said, all right, most people are going to have a majority of their games loaded on the SD card, probably not on the internal memory. So let's show what it's actually going to be like when you're playing on final hardware in a real world situation. It's far too often that we see companies show the best possible situations, that even when they know that most of the time that's not what it's like in the real world when you're playing a game. So the idea that they knew that IGN was coming over and they could have loaded Control or Doom or whatever game up on the internal storage, but instead they did it in what's much more like a real world scenario, I think that that deserves some applause, because they're showing a lot of transparency here. And this is something that I'm very excited about. How transparent Valve is being when it comes to the Steam Deck. They're being way more transparent than any other console manufacturer I've ever seen. And yes, I do think of this thing as a console. And it's funny because so does Yves Guillemot, of Ubisoft. Recently at a Q1 earnings call, Yves Guillemot was asked about the Steam Deck, and here's what he said. We're happy to see Steam Deck coming to the industry. It shows that it continues a flow of very innovative new hardware coming to the market. So we'll look and see how big it becomes. But if it's big, we will be able to put our games on it. That comment probably confused a lot of people because you can already play Ubisoft games on this device. So what did he really mean? Well, I think that he's thinking of the Steam Deck as it's kind of its own thing, as a console. And yes, if you want, you can install Windows on there. You can install the Uplay Store, the Epic Game Store, or whatever. You can install all of those things on there and play the games, no problem. However, I think a vast majority of people who pick this device up are just going to leave it alone. They're not going to install third-party stuff on there. They're just going to buy games from Steam. And if this takes off, I think it can draw publishers who otherwise have said, you know what, we're done with Steam and their 70-30 split. They went to the Epic Games Store for the 85-15 split. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's the rev share model. So if you buy a game on Steam, the publisher gets 70% of the money. Steam takes 30% money, 30% of the money. And that's pretty much industry standard up until the Epic Games Store came in and they said, you know what? We're going to do an 85-15% split. That's because they're new into the market and they wanted to bring publishers on board. And it worked. A lot of publishers said, all right, we'll put our games on the Epic Games Store so that we can keep a larger portion of the money when we make a sale of a game. In case you missed it, Stadia recently made that change as well. They went from the 70-30 split to an 85-15%. If you want to know more information about that, check out this video right there. And there's a link in the description down below as well. I think that what's going to happen here is that there's going to be a lot of publishers who said, we're going to move to the Epic Games Store. We're going to make our own stores like EA's Origin or Uplay Plus or all of these different stores that are on the PC. I think a lot of those publishers are going to come back if the Steam Deck is really popular, because publishers know that a vast majority of customers that pick up one of these devices, they're not going to erase it and install Windows and install the other stores, because at the end of the day, it's kind of a hassle and people just want to pick up the device and play it. And if that happens and it kind of consolifies Steam, then a lot of publishers are going to have no choice but to come back if this does well. Now, if it doesn't do well, then the publishers are just going to say, well, forget you, Steam. I don't really care. We're going to keep playing on the Epic Games Store. But I feel like this has a chance at the $400 price point, and with what we talked about earlier, where the games that IGN was playing were on the SD card. It's not going to be a terrible experience playing on the $400 model. And if that's the case, that's right in there with the other consoles. The last piece of information about Steam Deck that I'm going to share today is not really related to Steam Deck itself, but more how it's going to influence normal Steam. So for those of you that don't know, there were a few years ago, Valve said, hey, people hook their PCs up to their TVs and they don't want to have a mouse and keyboard laying around. So let's make a UI that is better for, the 10 foot instead of the 10 inches rule. And so they made what they called big picture mode. And overall, I like the way that it looks, but functionally it was kind of a bear to get around. And I was never really a huge fan of the way that it worked, even though I liked the way that it looked. Well, good news, big picture mode is going away and it's going to be replaced by Steam Deck OS, which, from what we've seen in the videos, I would say that Steam Deck OS has a very modern design. And when you look at big picture mode, it feels kind of dated, which I think is a good thing. The other reason why this is really good that they're replacing big picture mode is because you want to have the same UI across all the different ways that people can interact with your system. So when I sit down at my computer, I don't think that they're going to get rid of the default mode, but when I open up big picture mode on my computer, it should look exactly the same as it does when I use the Steam Deck OS on my Steam Deck. Why? Because it's frustrating when you get used to doing something one way, and then when you sit down at a different device and you want to do the same exact thing on a different device, you have to remember the different ways to accomplish that. So it's very good that they are bringing the Steam Deck OS UI and replacing big picture mode. And I'm also really happy that they are not just taking big picture mode and putting it onto Steam Deck OS, because it's not great, even though I like the way it looks. All right, that's it for our Steam Deck updates. If you want more Steam Deck updates, make sure you click on that like button down below and use the comment section and let me know which of these updates do you think is most interesting. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you all next time. Stay awesome, everybody.